Good. Today's topic is Azure. So I did a quick Q&A. You guys are not yet very familiar with Azure, so let me first try to explain it in my words before I hand it over to Microsoft. Okay. So what is Azure? Basically, Azure is Microsoft's cloud computing platform where you can rent space to put your server or your data or your application, right? So the Microsoft Cloud is actually a bunch of data centers, right? They have here one in Singapore, they have in Hong Kong, India, US, many different data centers. I think, over 200. So you can basically pick up your server or your data and move it to the cloud, and then you can access the data from anywhere. But we'll talk about that more a little bit later. Well, why should you use Azure or another competitor? Well, it makes your business actually more flexible, because a lot of you most probably still have a server in the office, right? Somewhere in the corner, data center maybe. But that server, first of all, you have to maintain it. It needs to be backup. You have an IT person that needs to make sure that it's running. Electricity, AC. Actually, it costs a lot. And then after 4 years, you probably have to replace it because it's old, right? It needs the backup power. So there's a lot of things that you need to maintain for your server. If you move that server to the cloud, actually a lot of those headaches will go away. You still will need some work and some maintenance, obviously, but it's much less because Microsoft is taking care of most of that. Backup, right? Availability. They have a security team that monitors your server. Everything is in the cloud, and that also means then you can access your server from anywhere. Right? I have customers that are using Azure. They used to have a file server with an ERP system in the office, and every time they need to do a transaction, they need to go to office, log in the ERP and start work. And that was an issue during COVID, right? Couldn't go to the office. So they actually moved their servers to Azure, and now they can remote desktop, so remote access into the server and basically work from anywhere. So Azure offers a lot of different services, really a lot, and it's quite technical. Before I go into that, I just put here a video. This is more for the IT people, but I put a video to show how easy it is to create a new server in Azure. Right? You don't have to look at the details, but it's literally less than 2 minutes work. So while I'm talking about the rest, you'll see that the server is up and running already. So what does Azure offer? Well, the most important thing that Azure offers, in my opinion, is virtual machines, VMs. VMs are basically the servers that you now have in your office, but we move them to the cloud. It becomes virtual. It's not running on a piece of hardware anymore. It's running in the cloud. Azure also offers storage solutions, right? So if you have a lot of data stored in your file server, maybe in the office, you could move that to Azure and use Azure as your main source of storage, right? It's backed up, it's accessible from everywhere if you allow it. So that's another factor that can help you benefit. Databases, you can use Azure to store your databases. For example, your ERP system. Web hosting, you can host your website even. Maybe you still have it with a traditional provider. You can actually move it to Azure. And first of all, make it faster. Secondly, spread the workload over the world, different data centers, so maybe your website will be faster. And AI. We're not really talking about AI much today, but Azure offers open AI, which is basically the ChatGPT, but for you to integrate with your applications, right? You can use OpenAI to build or to enhance your applications, make them smart, build an assistant, right? So those are the most common scenarios that we see for Azure. And while I'm talking, actually my server is already up and running. For the IT people here, you can actually see I'm already logged in with my remote desktop. So it literally took just 1.5 minutes, right, to get my server up and running. Of course, I still have to copy my data there, but the server is up and running. So, a few reasons why you choose Azure. I mentioned it already, but the first one I always mention is cost saving. And sometimes I get a little feedback from that. Isn't cloud more expensive than on-premise? I would say no, because you need to look at the entire picture, right? That server that I mentioned is in the data center, it costs electricity, backup, you need to hire an IT person, you need AC, you need a hardware contract in case something goes wrong. If you count that all up, it's actually also not very cheap to run a server by yourself. Every 4 years, also need to replace. So actually, you can save some costs by moving to Azure. Why? First of all, you don't have to buy anything up front. Okay, you can just pay per month for what you use. Maybe during Christmas, if you're retail, you need more capacity, more CPU resources, more memory. You can upgrade your server, pay a little bit extra, and maybe January you scale down, you pay less, right? Or if you don't use your server during the nighttime, you can turn it off, save money, right? Flexibility, like I mentioned, scale up and down, I think is really, really important. And also security, right? Because if you have your own server and maybe you're too small to have a whole dedicated IT team, you still need someone to manage that server, to make sure that it's safe, right? That it's not accessible from the outside or people try to hack it. So if you move your server to Azure, there's actually a lot of security tools that you can get from Microsoft to help you with this. And then at last, business continuity. So moving your server to the cloud means that you're no longer dependent on that single machine in the office, right? If it breaks down, you have no server, no ERP system. If you move to Azure, there's actually a lot of redundancy options. You can replicate your server maybe to other country. So if something happens in Singapore data center, maybe you can start it up somewhere else, right? So there's a lot of flexibility there. So another thing that I want to mention is billing. I get a lot of questions always about it. You know, it's so complicated, Azure, because when you look at the bill, yes, it's actually pretty complicated. But let's start with the basics. First of all, normally you're on a pay-as-you-go model, right? So let's say you move your server to Azure, you're gonna pay for the resources that you use every month. Yeah? At the end of the month, you get a bill, and you have to pay it. There's no upfront cost. If you want to save money, there's actually also a reserved instant option. Let's say you moved your server to Azure and it all runs smooth and you're happy and you want to save cost, you can actually fix those capacity, for example, for a year, and you can save, up to 20-30% already, just straight out of the box, right? So it saves a lot of money. So it's even cheaper then. But if you're a developer and you want to test out Azure, there's even a cheaper option, which is called spot pricing. And it's important. Not a lot of vendors will talk about this, but Microsoft has unused capacity in their data centers, right? They always need to have excess capacity to, to make sure that they can always serve everyone. So that unused capacity, they're actually selling against discount. Yeah? So that means you can even save more money by saying, hey, I want my server to run on a spot instance, what they call. That means Microsoft might turn it off if the data center reaches capacity, because that capacity might go to other customers that pay more for it. But it's ideal for applications you want to test out, or you have a developer team and you want to build some application in cloud. You can use spot pricing, which is much cheaper. Yeah. All right. So at the end of the month, you'll get a bill, but you can also look you can log into the Azure portal, and you can actually very detailed see what are you paying for. Okay, what is my disk? How big is it? How many CPUs I have? How much memory I use? And I agree that it's quite technical, but you have all the details here, so you can actually look at what are you paying for, and can you perhaps save more costs? Can you reduce your server? Can you make it smaller so the costs go down, right? Can I move it to another location? Save money. So you can log in and view that. And if you use AccessOrange for your Azure subscription, we will also help you optimize all of these costs, right? So we have an advisor who will look at, what are you using? Are you using it, wisely? Is there a cheaper option? Is there a better option, right? So we can advise you as well. But we also send you the bill at the end of the month, a detailed bill where you can see all the details. So you can save cost on two ways. The spot instance, but it's more for testing purposes. But the reserved capacity is one I would really recommend, because you can see it here. You can actually save up to 72% in costs, right? Normally you would always start with pay-as-you-go first, because when you start fresh with Azure, you don't really know what capacity you need yet. You're just starting. So once, let's say, you run your server for a couple of months in the cloud, everything runs fine, you don't need less performance, you don't need more performance, switch to reserved capacity. Yeah. Contract, right? I need to spend a lot of money to upgrade the service, to renew the service, buy new hardware. Maybe that's a reason. Maybe I have capacity needs that my current servers cannot meet, or my storage. Maybe I have security threats or issues, right, that I'm worried about. One important one that Navisha also mentioned, Windows Server. You have a lot of different editions, right? 2008, 2012, 2016, 2022. All those old editions, 2008 and 2012, they don't get security updates anymore if you are on-premise. So that's a big issue, right? Because if your server doesn't get security updates, that means they are vulnerable for any future attacks. So do check with your IT, what version are you running? What version of Windows Server are you running? Are you on 2008 or 2012? And a lot of customers are. That's another reason why you may need to upgrade or move to Azure. Because when you move that server to Azure, Microsoft will give you another 3 years security update extension for free, right? So they promise, okay, this is an old edition, 2012, 2008. We still update it with the latest security patches if you move it to Azure, right? All right, so how do we migrate? Well, there's a couple of steps that I'm gonna follow today. So first we have to move. We really have to pick up that server, copy it, and move it to Azure. Then after we're done, after we successfully moved, everything runs stable. I mentioned you can lock in pricing discounts by going to reserved instance, save up to 72%. So that's one we have to look at. But after we move, we can also look at innovation, right? Because now we have a server in the cloud, we can actually enhance it, maybe with AI, OpenAI, ChatGPT, maybe we build our own AI agent or chatbot based on the data we now have in the cloud. And there's a lot of possibilities once we move that server that was in the office into the cloud. So when you do that, you basically free yourself of what we call technical debt, right? Because that server, we haven't updated for many years, it's old. And it's also stopping us for really making some innovative moves, with AI especially. So when we move it, yeah, we can actually do a lot of extra things. So what can we move? And I will keep it brief, not too technical, but Navisha already mentioned Windows servers, file servers, ERP systems. We can move SQL Server databases. And for the people who don't know what is a SQL Server database, it's most probably the database underlying your ERP system. Yeah, most of the ERP applications, they run a SQL Server. We can enable remote desktop, so when we move that server, we can actually access it from anywhere, from home, from on the go, hotel, as long as it's secure, right? We can do that with VPN. And we can also move Linux, our web servers, for example, to Azure. So, how's the migration journey? I list out 4 phases in how do we get to Azure. The first phase, assess. We have to look at our current systems. We have to identify what servers do we have on premise, what is running on them, what are the relationships between servers, so we understand how complex or how easy it is to move to Azure. We make a plan and then we migrate. We do the actual migration, and usually that can be done in a weekend, for example, no downtime or minimum downtime. And once we migrate, everything is in the cloud, we can look at optimization. We can maybe enhance the application or improve the speed or improve the reliability. And then the last step is secure and manage. Now we have everything in the cloud, we need to make sure it's secure, right? It's updated, yeah? Like the server I mentioned, 2008, is it updated with the latest patches? That's very important. What is important with a migration? People, process, and planning. And that's where we can step in as well, because we have the knowledge, we have the expertise to migrate your servers. We need to plan carefully together with your team, right? When is the best time to do that? And what technology we use. So if you look at the migration part, there's different phases or different options for migrating. And I'm going to keep it not too detailed, but there are rehost, refactor, re-architect, and rebuild. So what is the difference? Well, let's look at the rehost. Okay, let's skip this. So a lot of the servers that are still in your office, let's for example take an ERP system or your accounting system, right? How do we pick that up? Well, we do that with lift and shift. What we do is we make a backup of this machine and we import this backup into Azure. And then after import backup, with a minor configuration change, we can already run it. It's actually most of the time very easy. Yeah? So we really make a disk-to-disk backup. You can make a complete backup of the disk of your server, import it to Azure, configure and run, and your server is already running. So we can do that in a weekend usually. Yeah? That's a lift and shift. So we migrate this server as it is, right? We don't make any changes. Just copy it, we move it over. ERP systems, file servers, other applications you have can also move, yeah, with a lift and shift. Refactor goes a little bit further. So, for example, we have our ERP system now running on one server. It runs the ERP and it also runs the database. And maybe it's a little bit slow. Okay, I want the performance to be better. So what I can do is I can move that SQL part into Azure as a servers. So I'm not going to take the entire server and move it as a disk image. I'm actually only going to take the Azure SQL Server part, use it to host my database. So it's not a one-on-one, it's actually an enhancement of my existing application. Because now I have my database in Azure, I can give it more resources. It can be faster, right? It can handle much more bigger data. Maybe the backup is much better organized because it's in Azure, and also the scalability. Re-architect is basically, goes a little bit further, but we also look at the application side. So what we do is we not only move that database, but now we're going to strip apart some of the ERP functions, maybe from the ERP system, and we build them as new in Azure, right? We can do that with a lot of Azure functionality, as mentioned there as well, but I don't want to be too technical. You can just think about it as an enhancement to your existing application in the cloud. And the last option we have is completely rebuild. So let's say that application we're using on premises is too old. We don't want to use it anymore. ERP is too old, too incompatible. Interface maybe looks like the 90s. Yeah, maybe you don't really want to move that to the cloud. You just want to start building something new. Actually, Azure offers a lot of tools for your IT developers or for us to help. Where Azure Function, Logic Apps, databases, you can actually very easily build your applications new in the cloud. Think about the Power Apps I mentioned in the beginning. In the backend, that's all Azure, right? So with Power Apps, you can very easily build your own apps, and you will think, oh, can we really build an ERP system with Power Apps? Yes, you can. We did, and I can show you. Yeah, it's actually doable, and you can customize it the way you want it. So there's a lot of different options you can do. But what is important, once you migrate your application, you have to look at the whole life cycle, right? So let's say we migrated the server, or we build a new app. Yeah, we have to look at the life cycle. So first of all, when we start, we need to look at cost management, right? See how we can optimize our cost, maybe a reserved instance, or we can reuse our existing license. This is also an option. We need to secure the environment. So with Azure, like Navisha mentioned, there's a lot of different add-ons, Defender, Antivirus, Defender for Cloud, Sentinel. There's a lot of names out there, but what you can remember is basically Microsoft can help you really monitor that server, because if you're afraid of using a server in the cloud, there's a lot of ways you can protect your data and protect your access. Backup and disaster recovery we have to look at as well. Once we have the server in the cloud, and that's where we can help, right? We can configure that backup. We can make sure that if this server in Singapore fails, then you have another server in India, for example, which you can start up, right? As a backup. Monitor, we have to look at application monitoring, infrastructure monitoring, that server, that ERP server we moved. Yeah, we need to make sure it keeps running. So Azure actually has a lot of options and a lot of alerts that you can use to let yourself be informed if something goes wrong. So Azure looks at your server, looks at the performance, Oh, maybe the disk is running out of space. Okay, it can send you an alert, right? Know where to start because it's quite complicated. You know, contact us, talk to us, right? We can look at your existing operation, your existing infrastructure, data center, even if it's just one server. We can look at it, we can make a plan for you, and help you transition. So, what can we do? We can look at the current, you know, what do you want to achieve? What is your goal, right? We can do an assessment. We write a migration plan. We can calculate the ROI compared to the existing cost that you have. We can migrate the workloads. Maybe start small. When that works, we go for the big, the big resources, just like Sumifru. And then after that, everything in the cloud, we can optimize the cost. So we can help with a lot of things. We can do a workshop with you or with your IT. Like I said, we can review what are you running, how can we migrate it to the cloud, and we can make a business case out of it, calculate ROI, calculate the expenses, investment you need to do, the monthly cost, and see how much you can save. We can do a proof of concept as well. Let's say you have a server, a smaller one that you want to try out for Azure. Yeah, do let us know. We can migrate that one first, and you can test it out. And of course, we can also help with the migration. If you're interested, there is a program which Qingling will introduce to you shortly from Ingram Micro. It's called the Azure Migrate and Modernize program. It's actually an incentive from Microsoft where they can help you do an assessment on how to migrate to the cloud. And there's also some other incentives which Qingling can explain much better than me. But if you're interested, scan the QR code. We will also share this deck later on with you. But please scan the QR code. There's also a Q&A on this event, but there's also a question whether you're interested in the AMMP, and we will contact you. Yeah.